Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Pleased to introduce Ben Brumberg. Hi, Ben.
Morning.
So we put this webinar together after the Chancellor's announcement last Friday evening, which gave some clarification on the plans for extending the coronavirus job retention scheme, some clarification on flexible furlough, and also an announcement about a second round of funding for the self-employed on the income support scheme. So our plan today is to cover those two subjects. We will happily take any questions that you have, ideally at the end of Ben's presentation. So if you use the Q&A panel to put your questions forward to Ben, or the chat, Q&A is preferred if possible. And then when we get to the end of our session with Ben, we'll try and answer as many of those as we possibly can. So over to you, please, Ben.
Brilliant, thank you. Morning all. Well, hopefully everyone is aware of the job retention scheme by now and the self-employed income support scheme. So what we're going to go through is more of the updates and the upcoming changes over the next few months and how that can affect your businesses and your employees. So starting with the job retention scheme. Well, what is changing and when? So the scheme closes to new entrants on the 10th of June. And what that means is, firstly, to get more clarity, we're expecting more information to be released over the next couple of months. But what we expect that to be is that those who have been furloughed or are currently on furlough will be able to continue to be furloughed from the 10th of June onwards. But as of the 10th of June, you wouldn't be able to furlough any new employees. So anyone who has not previously been on furlough cannot be then put on furlough after the 10th of June. The employers can start bringing back employees from furlough on a more flexible time basis from the 1st of July. Now that's been brought forward a month. Previously, we expected that to come into effect from the 1st of August, but now this is being brought to the 1st of July. And again, this really is important to mix with the first point here, which is that this relates to those who are currently on furlough. And the reason why the 10th of June has been picked is because the minimum furlough period for any employee is 3 weeks. So for an employee to be brought back from furlough on a flexible arrangement, they've had to have been furloughed for 3 weeks. So any new employee or existing employee who's on furlough, any time before the 10th of June can then be brought back in a flexible arrangement from the 1st of July. The scheme would then end, as we know, on the 31st of July. And by that I mean the scheme will be adapted. We're going to go into the new, more flexible scheme and more tapered relief from that point onwards. So from the 1st of August, employers will then have to start paying for the national insurance contributions and pension contributions for their furloughed staff. So the government think that's going to cost the employers about 5% of the actual furloughed staff costs. In reality, for most micro businesses, the employer's national insurance will be covered by employer's allowance, and in reality, and you would end up having to pay the 3% auto-enrolled pension contributions on top of the staff salary. From September, the employers still would have to pay national insurance contributions and pension contributions, but in addition to that, the furlough rebate is being reduced to 70%. Now that doesn't mean the staff salaries are reducing, it's for the employers to have to top up that extra 10%. And whilst there was this discussion in the past about the employer's ability to reduce salaries with an agreement with the employee, we don't believe that that's going to stay in place with the ability to transfer to this, to keep people on furlough from September onwards. We believe that in order for employees to carry on receiving that furlough and the company receiving furlough grant, the employees would have to be paid 80% of their salary, in which case the 10% would have to be made up by the company. And again, from October, that's going to reduce to 60% as a furlough rebate, with 20% being made up by the company. So there's going to start becoming a real cost to the company to keeping staff on furlough from October, well, from September onwards when it really starts to take into effect. But then this can be compensated and offset by bringing staff back on a more flexible arrangement. The scheme will close completely from the 31st of October. And we're not expecting any extensions to the scheme. I think they've extended it quite significantly in the past, and we're not expecting anything further from there. In terms of some of the questions that we've had in advance of this, and some of the questions you guys have raised before this, the webinar, what does it mean if I currently have employees who are on furlough? Well, as I said before, if they're currently on furlough, they can be brought back on a flexible arrangement from the 1st of July. And the flexible arrangement is really, it's dependent on the employer. So if you want to bring employees back on a 1 day a week basis, that's fine. 2, 3 days, it's completely down to you. You will obviously have to, the employer will have to pay for the employee's salary whilst they're working when they're being brought back from furlough. And then the furlough grant will be prorated to cover the period when they are not working. Again, same rules apply. You cannot, if you're on furlough, the employee cannot do any work, which is you cannot do anything that's going to generate income for the business or providing services to the business. They obviously can do that work when they're being brought back on that flexible arrangement. How can I bring back employees on flexible furlough? Well, it's really this that's going to get more clarity in the next few weeks. It's expected it's just going to be controlled by the employee, and it's going to be a self-assess. So at the end of the month, when you do your furlough submissions, you would report to the revenue what period they were furloughed for, what period they weren't, how many days, for example. We'd expect to see more of that get announced over the next few weeks. What happens if my employees return to work and then have to self-isolate? Well, this comes back to the change in the scheme. Again, we don't have complete clarity on this, but we believe that those who have previously been on furlough, when they return to work, can go back onto furlough, either on a flexible arrangement or a full-time arrangement, post the 10th of June cutoff. So if they have to self-isolate, you have the ability to put them on furlough whilst they're self-isolating. Alternatively, it's going to be statutory sick pay. So that's pretty much most of the changes with the furlough scheme and how that's going to impact and be brought out over the next few months. We're hoping to see I think they've announced the 12th of June as a date when they're going to announce some more updates to the scheme. But in reality, they're updating it all the time, and we'll see more information being released periodically between now and the end of July. But the real important point to bear in mind here is the 10th of June cutoff. That's really soon. So if you have any employees who are questioning whether they come back from furlough or whether to put them on furlough, that's a date to keep in mind. So moving on to the self-employed income support scheme. Again, most of you will be aware of this if you are self-employed or this applies to you. The eligibility is based on your average earnings for the last 3 years, ensuring that it's below £50,000 and more than 50% of your income is generated by self-employed trade. If you are eligible for the scheme, you would have been informed by HMRC, hopefully, and you would have received a rebate of £7,500. It's a one payment. It covers 3 months, and that is that eligibility is going to continue. So if you were previously eligible for the scheme, you should be eligible for the next grant here. This is the secondary grant, which comes into effect, which the government's just announced. Now, the previous scheme, the one which is on your screen now, this will close on the 13th of July. So if you are eligible or you think you're eligible, do check it. There is a great link in the government website which you can fill in your details and it'll tell you whether you're eligible for the rebate or not. But that closes on the 13th of July. After that date, you will not be able to get this initial grant. But from August onwards, there's a second grant which has been announced, and this is for a reduced rate, which is based on your average trading profits. Previously, it was 80% of your average traded profits, capped at £2,500 a month. Now it's 70% of your average trading profits, capped at the £6,500, £6,570 for the entire 3-month period. Again, it's a one lump sum that covers that 3 months, and that's paid out pretty quickly. like before, further guidance will be released on the 12th of June. They have announced that date. The thing to bear in mind with this is, again, eligibility will pass from the first. If you're eligible for the first grant, you'll be eligible for the second grant. The main caveat here is the first question, which comes in here: can I apply if my work and income have not been affected? So one of the eligibility criteria for the self-employed income support scheme is that you would have to have been affected and impacted by COVID. So you would have to be negatively impacted in essence, and you'd have to self-assess. So state that to the revenue that you believe that your company has been impacted negatively by what's been going on. Obviously, as self-assessed, the revenue have the right to look into that, inquire into that in the future, and we'd expect to see for both the job retention scheme and the self-employed income support scheme a lot more reviews into this once these schemes kind of start tapering off, come to an end, and the revenue have more free time to actually inquire into some of the submissions. So the reason why this question is key is because if you were impacted during the first 3-month period, the initial grant period, but now have kind of come back to being able to be profitable and almost pivoted the business so that you are now trading normally, which some businesses have. Some businesses, I appreciate, can't do that, especially retail, bricks and mortar retail. Then the second grant you may not be eligible for, because obviously you're no longer impacted by COVID. Likewise, the reverse, if you were not impacted originally, but now over time it has impacted you, you will now be eligible for the second grant as opposed to the first grant. So do you need to apply for the first grant of funding to claim for the second round? No, that's exactly what I was saying just a second ago. In essence, they are separate grants with the same eligibility criteria and the same calculations. Only one is given at 80% of your average profits. The second one is given at 70% of your average profits. But they stand independently from one another. Am I restricted in what I can do if I claim a grant under the SEIS, Self-Employed Income Support Scheme? You're not restricted in terms of the grant. Unlike the furlough and job retention scheme, and the job retention scheme cannot work whilst you're on furlough. The employees cannot work on the furlough. The Self-Employed Income Support Scheme, when you get that grant, you can continue working, you continue trading. It doesn't impact what you do and your ability to work. So that's one major benefit from this scheme versus the job retention scheme. However, just keep in mind that the grant is taxable, so it's treated as income, will go on your self-assessment. And also, if you've had to claim for income support, the income support needs to take into account the grant rebate. So there's people who, for example, the self-employed income support scheme, the grants didn't come out till very late, the actual rebates. And so for the initial periods, people have been claiming income support because they had no income coming in. These grants now impact that and is treated as income, so would impact your calculation for the income support. How can I claim for this new round of funding? It's very similar to the first round. If you've claimed for the first round and then just go through the same process for the second round, if you haven't claimed for this and even haven't claimed for the first round yet, then it's done through your online portal. There's an application through the government website. Unfortunately, this is one of the only schemes where your accountant and your advisor cannot apply it on your behalf. They've been very specific about that. Obviously, a lot of the information that you will need to apply can be obtained from your accountant and advisor, but you will have to do the application through the government portal yourselves. With this and with any other scheme, there's some great information on our own website, and we keep that updated regularly with the government updates. So do go there if you're struggling to find links to applying for the scheme or just general information. A lot of that is already on our website. So hopefully that's a good summary of the upcoming changes to both the job retention scheme and the self-employed income support scheme, which is coming into effect over the next few months. We will probably do another webinar as and when more information is released. And again, our website will be updated as and when more information is released. So hopefully now we've got some questions from you guys, which I believe Joe can go through. Thanks, Joe. You're still on mute. Okay, I think, all right, let's see what we've got here. So can an individual apply for self-employed income support if didn't apply the first round? I think we've covered that one. Can I bring someone back? Just to go back to that, so just in case you didn't hear it the first time, you can apply for the second round. If you didn't apply for the first round, they do stand separately from one another. So again, if you haven't applied for the first round or don't think you're applicable for the first round, you can apply for the second round. But if you don't think you're applicable for the first round, do get in touch with us. Maybe there is an opportunity to apply for that first round and get both grants in total. Just bear in mind that 13th of July is the deadline for making that first application. Can I bring someone back part-time from furlough, and if things don't work, put them back on furlough full-time? Is it that flexible? Yes, in essence it is. Well, I will stress here, that's what we've been led to believe, and that's what we believe is going to be the case, as in when more information will come out, we will update you, but in reality, the government have stated that the intention is to be very flexible. I had a great example from a client recently who brought people back from furlough, and the intention of getting them back up and running, but due to supply issues, couldn't get the supply of their stock, and therefore had to re-put them back onto furlough again. This is tricky right now because you have to put someone on furlough for a minimum of a 3-week period. Now, we'd expect that same period to continue. The government's always emphasizes a 3-week minimum furlough period, but for that, there to be flexibility in that period as to how many days and how often someone is on furlough. Again, we don't know whether for that 3-week period you have to agree 3 days on furlough, 2 days working for the entire period, or whether there will be some more flexibility during the period. We will get more information as the government gets released. But they've led us to believe that it's going to be incredibly flexible. And I think the final question here we have is, will I have to repay the self-employed income support grant if I'm later audited and found out to had accounts not to have been affected by the coronavirus? That's what we believe again will be the case. We'll get the answers to something like that in reality retrospectively once there have been some inquiries into these grant applications, and we will then find out more when the revenue, what things they will accept and what they won't accept as excuses and reasons how you've been impacted. But we would expect that if you haven't been impacted and the revenue are able to prove that you haven't been impacted, that they would expect you to repay those grants. And I've got some, here's go through some of the Q&As here. So I think let me just unmute Joe. I don't think I can do that. Okay, so we've not yet furloughed anyone, but we'll do as of 10th of June. Is that the correct start date, or should it begin on the 9th? That's an interesting point, actually. I will have to come back to you on that one. If you drop me an email, I'll share my email address after this. Drop me an email with that question, and I'll come back to you to the exact date. I believe the cutoff is the 10th, but I don't want to give any information out which could impact that. So just do drop me an email, and I'll come back to you with that exact date. Would research work be permitted on furlough? This is a tricky one, and the points here is, whilst you're on furlough, you cannot do anything that will provide a service to the company or generate income. If you are researching, which is going to create potential income in the future, which is going to open up opportunities to the business in the future, then the answer is it's probably not permitted. What you can do is you can train, and training in areas which might result in new knowledge, which you could potentially use in the future, is great, but you can't train again if it's going to create revenue for the business. So it's a very tricky area, and I would err on the side of caution there. We have sent furlough letters to all our furloughed employees, asking them to sign and return a signed copy to us. In one case, I've not had a signed copy returned. Could this be an issue? So there's two aspects of the furlough scheme. The first is actually agreeing to put someone on furlough. And now this is more of a legal area, but I'll tell you what I've heard from solicitors who I've spoken to about this. Agreeing to put someone on furlough is from my understanding, it's from the employer's perspective. You've employed someone and you've contractually employed them to work for you, and it's up to you whether you actually want them to work or not. So putting them on furlough and telling them not to work is down to the employer's discretion. So yes, if they haven't signed the copy and letter and returned it to you, I don't see an issue with that. Again, from what I've understand from a legal perspective, that shouldn't be an issue. But the second part of this is reducing the salary. If you have reduced an employee's salary down to the 80% furlough amount, that is a change in your contractual terms. In order to reduce an employee's salary to 80%, you need their permission, their confirmation, their acceptance of that. So if this furlough letter that you've sent out to your employee also includes acknowledgement and acceptance of a reduced salary, then that is something that I would stress that they return and sign and give back to you, because otherwise they may not have accepted that, in which case you have options of putting them on to unpaid leave, or maybe having to lay them off if they're not willing to accept a reduced salary in that case. When they come back to work and they were on a higher wage before furlough, how can we pay furlough? Do I have to make up the difference? Okay, again, this is an employment law question here. Whilst they're on furlough, there's a temporary reduced rate, the 80%. This is an agreement between you and the employee to reduce their salary to an 80% threshold. The alternative, if the employee doesn't agree to this, is again, it's layoffs or unpaid leave or forced holidays in certain instances. So just keep that in mind. When they come back to work, they're entitled to their full salary. The furlough agreement normally is a temporary reduction in their salary. So if it's temporary, if it's not, I'm assuming it's not being a permanent reduction in their salary, when they come back to work, they're entitled to their full salary. If you then, when they come back to work, don't intend to pay them a full salary or don't want to pay them full salary, then there needs to be a further agreement, a further change in contract, really, of reducing and mutually agreeing a change in the contractual terms to a different salary rate. So if this is something you're looking at, I would strongly suggest you speak to the employment lawyer and go through it with them as and when staff start returning to work. Slightly off topic, but if our employees take holiday during furlough, do we pay them their full wages? It's a very good question, and actually it's really an important one. The employees are entitled to their holiday pay in full. It is the Working Time Directive states that that holiday pay must be paid at the full rate. And so if they take holiday during the furlough period, you as an employer have to top them up. There's actually three potential options to deal with whilst an employee is on furlough and to deal with the holiday. And again, a really important thing which is going to come up when people come back from furlough. The first is topping them up for the holiday, and that covers bank holidays if they're not entitled to work during a bank holiday, and a lot of people are prorating the holidays. That's probably the cheapest option because you're paying the difference between the furlough rate of 80%, which the government's giving back to you, and you're paying the 20% top up. The other option is giving them holiday in lieu, so that when they come back to work, they'll have additional holiday to use throughout the year. In that case, you're paying their holiday in the future, but at the full rate, so it can be a bit more expensive. And the final one is using the last few days of the furlough leave or extending the furlough leave and paying that as holiday, so that it utilizes up the holiday rate. Again, you will have to pay them the full amount, and you're paying 100% as a pay opposed to the top up. So topping up the employees for their holiday during the furlough leave period is probably the cheapest way of doing it, but I'll be honest, it's probably the most complicated way to do the calculations. So do get in touch if that's something you're intending to do. And the final question I've got here is: there's no support for people who have over 50% of the self-employed income as dividends. Is this correct? So if more than 50% if you're self-employed and more than 50% of your income is not from self-employed, from investments such as dividends or interest or payroll, then you won't be entitled to the self-employed income support scheme. If you're getting dividends and you're employed, then you might be able to be furloughed and get support that way. But if reality is most of your income is from investments such as dividends or interest, then there is no specific scheme available to you. The government haven't released anything that supports those type of individuals, unfortunately. I think that's all our questions. Joe, if I missed anything, I think I have to unmute you. There we go. There you go. You're unmuted now. Sorry.
I'm
Joe,
not used to being silenced by a man, Ben. There is another question actually that's coming from Andy.
Okay.
So the question is the small business allowance of 4k for employers when NIC less than 100k per annum, does this have to be deducted from the job retention allowance being claimed, or is this just a standard allowance and additional support to smaller companies outside of job retention?
Okay, so there's been a lot of debate about this, and it's something that we would probably expect to see the full answers retrospectively as and when the government inquire into it. So the furlough calculation, the furlough rebate, the initial period allows for the government to pay the national insurance on top of the salaries of those employees on furlough. So, but it stresses in the legislation that this is after taking into account employers' allowance. So for those who may not be aware, companies who have small businesses, most of which who don't have multiple businesses, will be able to claim up to £4,000 of employers' national insurance as an allowance. So the first £4,000 of employers' national insurance, which they pay on in respect to their employees, they get offset by this allowance. So they save that £4,000. Now, as I said, the furlough calculations state that you must take that into account first when working out what NI rebate should be. So for a larger scheme, and let's say the furlough calculation said there's £5,000 worth of national insurance payable, the first £4,000 will be offset by the allowance, which means the government will reimburse the company for the £1,000 left over. Now the question is whether you actually claim that allowance or not. And this is something where there is a lot of speculation as to what's allowable, what's not allowable. And we've erred on the side of prudence here, and we've claimed that employance allowance for the first £4,000 worth of national insurance, as you would normally have done in any business. Some companies have opted to not claim the employer's allowance and claiming it once employees come back from furlough, and that would be dubious and question whether that's going to be accepted by the revenue. But once the employers have come back from furlough, assuming you have claimed your employer's allowance during the furlough period, the remainder of that £4,000 would then be able to be offset against the employer's allowance once the employers are back from furlough, as you would normally do. Okay. I hope that answers that question. It's a bit of a tricky one there. Okay,
well, thanks very much, Ben. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our Q&A. Thanks very much, Ben, for your insight there. As always, more information is available on the Grunberg & Co website, which is grunberg.co.uk. You can see Ben's personal email address, business email address on this slide. So if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to drop him an email. We will make a recording of this webinar available on the website later today and drop you an email to let you know when it's available. So thanks very much, Ben, and thank you to everybody for attending.
Thanks all.